Look, I'm going to say some things in this recording that ultimately sound a little like insults, but I promise you they're coming from a very good place. Backwater is a really interesting looking game, and when I talk about what it evokes to me, I want you to remember that I am an older dude who has played 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons and lived at arm's reach from the American Empire my entire life. So when I start saying things like, it's a resolved American Gothic, and you think, well, he doesn't really understand American Gothic? Yes! Okay, great, congratulations, you are correct, take your prize and run away from me far, far away. I surrender, you have won. But if you can handle hearing that kind of thing said with this kind of accent, stick around, because I think that you might like Backwater, and you might like its Kickstarter that's going on right now. Alright, so when it comes to any given tabletop RPG, the question has to be asked, what does this let me play and why do I want to play it? There is a fantasy in the engagement surface of any given game. And for this one, the kind of depends on the type of player you are as to why you want to play it. The first high-level pitch, the one that brings you in with its aesthetic, is that Backwater is a post-apocalyptic American Gothic narrative set in the swamps and bogs of New Orleans-style locations, building not in America as she is, but on the ruins of America as we imagine she probably would be remembered. It is gloomy and aesthetically resonant. It is filled with the little details of the marginalia. People who don't normally get to be the front and center of stories in the world as we know it now take their presence in the art and the storytelling here. A place steeped in a beautifully deep, interesting, intricate culture at crossroads of different ideologies and aesthetics is brought into a new place where certain elements of that old aesthetic can be left behind and focus instead not on why they are the way they are, but how they feel being how they are. That's your kind of vibe pitch. You're all wardens wading through the swamps, finding settlements, helping people, but also dealing with the aftermath of a great falling, a tumbling castle that has left behind shapes in its past. I like the vibe. I like the energy. In a lot of games that have tried to tap into the cursed, haunted swamp, there's often a dominant cultural reading. Historically, it's much more interesting than that, and the stories that come from there are often steeped in ghost narratives and stories of reckoning with their own history. Which isn't to say that this is all necessarily New Orleans, New Orleans. I, of course, wouldn't really be able to tell you if it's perfectly nailing that or not. Essentially, a lot of what I know about this region comes from Jimmy Buffett, which should really tell you all you need to know about me, like, as a person in general. What Backwater wants you to be doing is exploring a dangerous place that demands respect and doesn't care about you as an individual, but where the problems still have at their heart some element of relatable human agency that often ties into the idea of respect. Things in this place are dangerous because they don't respect people, or people have disrespected them. There's a coherence in how the monsters are presented, where typically speaking, they are things that you can deal with if you know to avoid them, and that brings with it a certain vision of respect. Respect for the wild, respect for nature, respect for other people and their strange ways, and respect for warnings about don't deal with those people, they will eat you. Alright, so that's your vibe, your tone, your style. What about the mechanics? What kind of game is it? Am I looking at something that's fast and fluid and designed to incorporate a series of yes-andings? How much of the game book that you're buying is mechanical information that you can work with? And the answer to that is quite a bit. This is a pretty crunchy game. I do not mean to damn this game with the comparison, but the engine of Backwater feels to me like 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons second draft, right? A lot of the ideas here feel like someone started with, I want to fix what's wrong with D&D, and then, after making that fix, they refined that fix into this. This is, again, not a complaint. I think Dungeons & Dragons has pretty consistently had an excellent engine that's merely been cursed with being so popular its imperfections come out. Here, the engine works on a d20 roll, which is typically speaking going to be aiming for higher numbers with something of yours added to them to try and hit a goal number. You have your own goal numbers, which you might recognize if you're a 4th ed fan, there are dozens of us, as being like your defenses. You have your fort, your ref, your will, which are fixed numbers that you have on your person that other people have to overcome if they want to attack you. This means that instead of getting a lot of opposing rolls where my bad luck and your bad luck can interact with one another, or my best luck and your bad luck can mean that the numbers that we worked from don't matter, it's much simpler and cleaner to have consistent, stable numbers. This also reduces the amount of dice rolling that players and dungeon master storyteller types do against one another, and over time, simply as a matter of the law of large numbers, the person rolling the most dice, the storyteller in most cases, is going to have the most opportunities for good luck to come up. That is the person who is going to get streaks and crits. Streaks and crits aren't bad things for that player to have, but it tends to be secretive and it tends to be under their control, which can mean that it's less exciting feeling for them because they're always using these as tools to push the story forward. While for a player, good luck, a lucky natural 20 at the right moment can be super exciting and give you a lot of oomph to that moment, a really dramatic thing that happens. So if you can bias the system towards players getting those moments, I think that's a good thing. It's skill-based. You're not going to have the extensive and detailed combat system of Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition represented quite like that. Characters level up fast. After every session and major event, you're meant to level up, and you're meant to get special abilities as you level up, which means that a game in this case probably doesn't last more than like 20 sessions overall, which that may sound like a lot of lost space for anyone familiar with D&D, where you can go sessions at a time without leveling up. But remember, this is now 20 sessions is half a year of your life playing one character in one scenario. That's actually a pretty cool kind of boundary to have on what a character is expected to gain over time. That said, the place where I would most compare it to Dungeons & Dragons is the level of crunch and detail in player options. It's very strange to be able to point to a game that very clearly understands the appeal and the materiality of a tabletop miniatures setup. Backbone System has a huge amount of stuff in this book that's designed to make encounters interesting. It's designed to give players the feeling of mechanical impact in encounters, and it doesn't limit encounters to just combat, obviously. The system is designed to have a lot more flexibility and to treat things that aren't combat with about the same level of importance as combat. So that's all good stuff there. One of the other things mechanically I'd say really importantly stands out to me about Backwater is that the game system is a lot more willing to be honestly exposed to the storyteller. If you aren't aware, a lot of systems from older versions of Dungeons & Dragons are pretty much eyeballed. There's a whole range of systems that were all kind of, yeah, that'll do for balance reasons. And that's why older editions of the game have weird balance problems. I say older editions because I don't know how this works in 5th edition. I don't want to present any expertise about how 5th edition works and therefore give you the impression that I'm saying Backwater relates to 5e. I'm simply using the Dungeons & Dragons I know because that's what it reminds me of. In a really good way, by the way. I don't look at this and go, why wouldn't I rather play D&D? I look at this and go, oh, hey, this would be a lot faster to get running for D&D, and if I had to create something totally bespoke for something in a campaign, it wouldn't be the immense ball ache it is in D&D. So, top-notch, good marks there. But okay, so good vibes, interesting, engaging mechanics, exposed player systems, which are really quite a good thing to have. How does it do on presenting that? Well, it does a really good job. I feel that this system is very big, and it still does a good job of on-ramping me as someone who doesn't know how to play it and doesn't have a person to talk to about how it should be played and broadly how it should be run. Particularly a recurrent theme throughout the book, which I don't think the game system ever says this is the kind of encounter you should be dealing with, is that most of the time bad stuff is the result of human agents, not necessarily things that are wholly human the way that you and I are, assuming I'm not talking to some of my dog listeners, and I do apologize, I didn't mean to be rude to you there, but the way that agency in this world is often expressed through a person choosing to do things for their own selfish ends. There is a degree to which nature is just trying to exist, and you can wind up getting in trouble when you don't respect nature. But villainy and suffering and torment, the things that are pushing people to the edge and asking them to strain their resources, those are all being exacerbated by people. And that is really interesting. In the book, there is an explicit section discussing the idea of the relationship between race and racism in the setting, how it wants to tap into the authentic feeling of these locations, which absolutely have racist histories, because of all the colonialism, I'm sure you've heard. But those places are not about presenting that racism to the players as a matter of course. It isn't about, hey, we're going to go down here, and part of the setting is you're just going to deal with people being awful all the time and seeing this as just an intractable part of this universe. So there's an attempt to build on the best elements of this cultural space and not treat it as if it has to be as an inheritor of the racism that we have already put there. This is cool, and I think, not that I can say anything for the minds of the authors, but I think that this relates to why it's post-apocalyptic. The fact is, if you were to set something in historical New Orleans and use the ideology of then, and then add in magical elements, the question of, yeah, but what about all the racism, looms large. By setting it in the future, and then setting it post-apocalyptic, and having the culture of the America lands, as it describes them, collapsed around you, instead of simply saying, we are replicating the existing culture, you are now playing with a funhouse mirror version of it, and what has survived, and what has endured from that? What are the things that people assume has to follow from the existence of your culture? It's a really interesting question when you get down to it, especially for people who've had to deal with people telling them to put away their culture. What of you endures? I think it's really cool that this is a tabletop RPG that has given me all these questions to chew on without really seeming like it's trying to make me do that. Not to say that it's a thoughtless game, but at no point does the story pull over and say, all right, by the way, I want a 500-word essay question answer on how you, the storyteller, feel about the implementation of racism in your game. It's just a little sidebar about race and racism in the setting, and then it moves on. And then, Satan shows up. But that's because that's one of the people messing things up. It's okay. Look, it's fine. One other thing about this. Backwater is a first game. If you have any of the itch bundles for tabletop games, you probably already own a copy. Well, right now, there is a 2-part follow-up piece by the same people on Kickstarter. Link down in the description. So you can, if you have the bundles, go check out Backwater, leaf through it, and then go, oh, this is pretty cool. And then you can go to the Kickstarter and throw those people a couple of bucks, even if you don't necessarily intend to follow up on this, because you get to say, hey, I like the stuff you're doing and I want more people to take this kind of risk. So I'm willing to buy a book that might sit on my shelf. I have bought more books for less good reasons. And this stuff is genuinely interesting, even if you don't necessarily wind up using this game in your own games. If you don't use the system, if you want to keep using something else that works better for you, there's still wonderful world building, a great degree of character voice that you can dig through, good examples of good examples stepping you through the character creation process, and pretty good editing. It's kind of embarrassing to bring this up again, but a lot of indie TTRPGs aren't very well edited and aren't very well laid out. And when you notice a book with good layout and good editing, it does stand out. So yes, I hold up this as an example. I recommend you check it out. You probably already have it if you're one of the people who's bothering to check out my videos, and then go check out the Kickstarter. You might find something you really love.